All right, everybody, welcome to our discussion. What law students need to know, pre-OCI, OCI, and more. Thank you to Amy Goldstein and Legal Mentor Network for collaborating with Summer Associate Hub on this wonderful program, and our panelists, Lauren Tapper, Doug Sapphire, and Ashley Alford. All right, so Lauren and Doug, I'm going to start with you to kick off this question. It's no secret that the 2L hiring timeline has accelerated, and it's a big reason why we're hosting this program. So, of course, different firms and different markets may be different, but what does a general timeline look like from your perspective?
So I will start. So our markets are New York and California, and we begin engaging with students when the schools allow us to come on campus. We'll do some participation with different student groups, typically in the November time period of the 1L year in the fall. And we really interact with 1L students to let them know about different practices, about our firm. We do allow students to have the process of interviewing with us for the 1L application, which typically opens for us in January. But for the 2L process, it really opens in May. So we ask students to either go through their school if we're participating through on campus, or go directly through us through our portal to provide their application. And our interviewing generally takes place mid-June through mid-July.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Doug, what are your thoughts there?
Sure. So I'm happy to kind of provide hopefully a little bit of the 30,000-foot perspective, just because certainly we work with law firms around the country, and our students sort of engage with law firms around the country, and so I think we have a little bit of a unique vantage point. I mean, it's interesting, Albert. I think when you started, you used the word general. And I think the challenge is that there is no general anymore, right? There are some trends, certainly, and I think there are, we're starting to see a little bit of coalescing around certain types of timelines and processes. But that's sort of an evolving thing at this point, and is very evident, I think, based on what you'll hear today, and I imagine what students are kind of seeing in their own experiences. I think maybe the easiest way to think about it from my perspective is to kind of break it down into a couple of different buckets in terms of timeline. Certainly, as Lauren mentioned, we're seeing lots of law firms engaging with students on campus and off campus starting in the fall. That historically was the case, but was still relatively minimal. That was oftentimes more of a spring, the engagement was more of on a spring timeline than a fall timeline, but we've certainly seen that shift. I think the first big bucket is actually noticing how 1L hiring has kind of the timeline for 1L hiring has kind of bled into the timeline for 2L hiring. And in that respect, it kind of shows up in a couple of different ways. I think, we're seeing certainly that there are, firms that are meeting with 1Ls or speaking with 1Ls around 1L positions that are also kind of using that as an opening avenue to engage with them potentially around 2L positions. That's kind of shown itself in ways that are sometimes very direct, where there are firms out there who are making sort of simultaneous 1L and 2L offers. There are also firms who are, perhaps because of the smaller size of their 1L program, not extending a 1L offer to somebody, but extending shortly after they complete that process, extending a 2L offer. So that's sort of the December, January, February piece of it that we're seeing. And now we're kind of getting right into the middle, in early March of the period where, we're going to start to see, from what we've learned from our engagement with firms, the opening of, as Lauren mentioned, the sort of online direct application portals, which is, as we've sort of seen over the last couple of years, has become, I think, an extremely prevalent recruiting tool for employers. NALP recently released some information that more than 90% of law firms are using that as a substantial recruiting tool. And we're noticing firms that are sort of giving dates for the openings of those portals anywhere between March 1st to June 1st. And so I think that's kind of that period of the recruiting cycle. And then the sort of last bucket of the recruiting cycle, I think, is going to be sort of that June-July timeframe, when firms are engaging with students around formal recruiting programs, OCI programs, some of the larger national programs like the Loyola Patent Fair or the Lavender Law Job Fair, things like that. But again, when you talk about a general timeline, really what we're seeing is In some cases, beginning in December, January, and maybe not concluding until July, August in some cases.
No, thanks for that. That's super helpful. So Ashley, welcome. I guess the next question you'll be able to answer. So I guess quickly introduce yourself, and then I'll tee up the next question.
Yeah, so sorry. That was like my worst nightmare, where as soon as I tried to turn my camera on, everything froze and crashed. So apologies. But my name's Ashley Alford, and I'm an early careers legal recruitment manager based in the Houston office of White and Case.
Great. Thanks for joining, Ashley. So this question is for Ashley and Lauren. I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well. What does the format and timing look like for your firms, I guess, as one example of the many examples that are out there?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So we haven't finalized our date for when our applications are going to open for White and Case yet, but we're keeping our ear to the ground, kind of seeing, what else continues to come to light. But we're currently looking early summer, so likely early May, but date has not yet been finalized for us specifically. As Doug was kind of alluding to, the opening dates for applications are all over the place, but the way that we do it, we have applications open, and then we utilize a third-party system for students, for any applicants to complete a virtual recorded screening interview. And so we ask students to do that within 48 hours. But one misconception to that is that it's not an AI tool in any way, shape, or form. The students are completing a recorded screening, and it is us as the recruiting team who is actually reviewing those videos. So I like it as a way to evaluate candidates a little further than just what's on paper. And so once we do that, then, or once the students complete those screenings, then we likely will start reviewing them immediately, mostly so that we don't get too backed up. And because of the condensed timeline and everything, our summer programs are going to be starting around the same time. So we're going to have to stay on top of those. So realistically, with our summer program starting and everything, we probably won't start conducting callbacks until maybe, at least in Houston, late May, early June for top candidates. And that's, knowing that we probably aren't going to have grades at that point. So the candidates that we do start interviewing early will likely have either had prior touch points with us or already have really, spectacular grades, and we're not like too worried about it. But every office is different. And so in terms of the callbacks themselves in Houston, we give students the option to interview either virtually or in person, with a strong preference towards in-person callback interviews. But I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later. We know that it's going to be a little bit harder for students to navigate one way or the other. So we're flexible in that sense.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, Lauren, I know you touched on the timing a little bit, but I'm curious to hear if you have any other thoughts on what the format might look like for you.
So our format is that we are completely virtual in our process because we don't want students to honestly have to make a decision and feel like they made the wrong decision. So our interview process is virtual for throughout the process. And then if a student receives an offer, we invite them to come and visit us if they're interested to either see the location, again, either usually California or New York. But we like to try and take that guesswork out because we acknowledge that students are really busy. They're sometimes interviewing in multiple markets. And then our process, as Ashley said, we will open up our application, but we do want that second semester of grades. So we will not interview or start the interview process until mid-June because we want to make sure students have a chance to get their grades in. And I did see a question in the chat about direct application versus OCI. We do both. So, it's okay if someone applies to us through both channels. If we've met you through one channel, we'll probably give a student in your school, if you did direct application and we meet with you, we'll probably tell the school to say we've met with them. Let's give somebody else a chance in that slot for just to make sure that everyone has equal access.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lauren. Yeah, and one important note about OCI, which I'll add, is now that the timelines are moving up, a lot of school OCI schedules vary a lot now. So the question around whether OCI or direct is better really depends so much on the school that you're in as well as the candidate that you are, because one school might have OCI in May and another school might have OCI in a month later in June. So yeah, thanks for that, Lauren. All right, so now that we talked a little bit about the timeline, we have a sense of what the timeline looks like. What is your advice to students who are interested in a summer associate job for next year about how to navigate this process? Doug, I'm going to come to you for this one to start.
The most loaded question of them all. No, I mean, I will say as a law student many moons ago and somebody who's worked with law students for, more than 15 years, I can really empathize and I think the first thing to acknowledge is that, there's no question that everyone realizes what a challenge this is for students. And nobody takes that lightly. And I think everybody's kind of really trying on the recruiting and the school end to kind of work to figure out ways to make it a little bit less stressful or a little bit less, somewhat chaotic for students. And so, just kind of put that out there first. In terms of advice, I think there's a couple of things that really stand out to me. One is, this is a process that, again, is sort of for anybody with some historical perspective, really did used to be a little bit more one size fits all, right? It happened on a pretty well organized timeline, and the processes were all pretty similar, and kind of every firm was going through things in the same way at the same time. And so it gave students a certain level of predictability. That one size fits all doesn't really exist anymore. And so, from my perspective, the best piece of advice that I can give students is not to approach it as if it is one size fits all, right? As you just heard both Lauren and Ashley mention, right, when they're sort of talking to candidates about when to apply and through what method to apply and kind of how to make decisions about, what your process is going to look like, you really do have to think about yourself as an individual. And I'll kind of make the plug for really utilizing career services offices at your law schools. We have a terrific team here at BC, and I know, so many of my colleagues at other schools throughout the country do as well. I think the best thing that you can do as a law student right now is be sitting down at this point in time, if you haven't already, and having conversations with your career counselor about what this should look like for you, right? And that's going to depend on variables like, what market you're in, what markets you're applying to, what types of work you're interested in, right? So therefore, perhaps what types of firms you're going to target, giving some credence to, to sort of what your first semester grades were, what your undergraduate background is, what your professional background is, what your network looks like. There are all these different pieces of the puzzle, I think now that are really kind of critical to evaluate when making a decision about how you want to move forward. And really sitting down and thinking about what all those things mean in terms of your search, I think is going to really make sure that you're doing what's best for you and not just following the echo chamber, right? Because that's such an easy thing to do, especially in the law school and law firm environment. And I just don't think it's going to pay dividends for a lot of students in the way that it used to. I think the one other thing I would say in terms of general advice is, I think the environment that we exist in, I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but the environment that we exist in really puts a premium on over communication. And so to the extent that, you're really interested in a law firm and you're just not quite sure what the right approach to take is, you should be asking, right? I mean, as a law student, you should be reaching out to Lauren and Ashley and the people who do what they do at all of these firms and trying to get some guidance from them on what they're looking for. But doing that, having made sure that you've read everything that's on their website and you've really done as much research as you can. And I think that communication, as well as the relationship building that always kind of goes to the networking and informational interviews and kind of informal conversations that you can have at law school programs and things like that, all go into the process. But they're not only going to make you a stronger candidate, they're going to make you a more informed candidate, which I think is going to be a greater tool for success.
No, that's great. Thank you, Doug. Ashley, anything to add there from your perspective at a firm?
Yeah, echo everything that Doug said. At my personal thoughts towards like when they should apply, and again, prefacing this with every firm does things differently. Sometimes offices in a firm do things slightly differently. So I think I saw this question in the Q&A too. We try to review applications on a rolling basis, like as they come in. So to the extent that you can get applications in early, then I would do that. But again, it's totally up to you. I think if you apply middle or later down the road, it's not like you're not going to get an opportunity. It just keeping in mind that for the sake of us staying, on top of things, we do have to start reviewing those as they come in. But with that too, while there are typically more 2L positions available than 1L positions, my advice to students is always try not to get discouraged. I'm a big believer that everything happens for a reason. And if you don't get a call back from your top choice, it's okay. It's, maybe it wasn't meant to be. There's likely another opportunity available that will end up being so much better for you anyways. So try to keep your head up. It's totally okay if, things don't work out like you hope they would or how they planned. I think that's part of being adaptable and just knowing that, okay, this plan A didn't go, so now I'm going to try to go to plan B or plan C, whatever that is. But also keeping in mind, kind of, tailoring off of what Doug had said a bit ago, is that it's just as much your choice as it is ours. And so when you choose to spend your summer or wherever you choose to spend your summer, it will have an effect on where you potentially start your career. So my thing to students is to trust your gut, choose the firm that feels right to you or employer that feels right to you if it's not in a law firm, what you feel most comfortable with. And, because at the end of the day, you want to enjoy where you work.
No, I love that, and I think it's such an important point. Kind of everything happens for a reason, and as much as you think you might know what you want, what's the best fit for you as a 1L, so many things will change, and it's really hard to know at that point. So, kind of going with it and seeing where things go and keeping an open mind is great. All right, so one of the most important things that students can do is show interest in a firm throughout the school year. And we already talked a little bit about how firms are coming on campus throughout the year. So, given the accelerated timeline, what can a student do throughout the school year to show interest in a firm, and then use that to their advantage when it's actually time to apply? So, Lauren, I'm gonna ask you this one.
Sure. Well, first of all, the firms recognize that you're students and you're in law school and you have responsibilities and you're supposed to be taking exams and learning. So you can't do everything, and we recognize that. So please do not spread yourself so thin that you're feeling like you need to go to every event. We do like that when you're interested in either a firm or a practice that you can attend, but if you cannot for any reason, that's not the only way to learn about a firm. And as Doug mentioned, there's lots of resources on your own campus. You can reach out to people directly. I have spoken to many students to talk about our summer program or their particular practice of interest, and I've connected them with either people in the practice or alumni. But I do think getting a sense, and Ashley mentioned this already, of what's of interest to you. This is kind of a two-way street. You want to make sure when you're going to these places to show engagement, it's not just to say, I'm here, I just want them to know I'm here. You want to figure out if what they're saying really fits to what you're looking for. And you want to make sure that, we can provide answers to questions that you have. But we do recognize that you cannot be everywhere at once. So, it's not as if you have this mad race and you have to be at every single event. We understand that. But if for some reason you're interested in a firm and they came on campus and you could not go to any of their events, please reach out to somebody in the firm, find a connection point. All the recruiters are happy to speak to you, but also people that are alum of the school, they're passionate about what they do. They're often so eager to talk about their experiences and how they get there. And Ashley and I I'm going to speak for Ashley. We're always receiving resumes from people that, connected to a student or, knows someone who wanted to learn more about the firm. And we're happy to kind of have those channels as well.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Ashley, anything to add there?
Yeah, again, echoing everything that Lauren mentioned, I think my biggest points are to try to make yourself known, whether you are able to physically introduce yourself to somebody in person that came on campus. And even if you can stop by for only 5, 10, 15 minutes, we as recruiters take note of attendees at events. So it does go a long way. But also to Lauren's point is that there are a ton of virtual opportunities for you to listen into different office perspectives or practice areas or what it's like to be a junior associate in a law firm. It really, the sky's the limit there. And so there's no shortage of that. Check LinkedIn, check firm websites, see what they're doing to give you the opportunity to listen in, because it's we understand that a virtual opportunity may be a little bit better for your schedule, but even then we still take note of who actually attends those events. And, come application time, I am always a big proponent of, in your cover letter, name drop. If you met somebody on campus, tell us who you met, at what event it was. I think some students might feel a little nervous to do that, but I think it's helpful because it actually shows that you, one, remember who you spoke to, but that you did take the time to meet somebody, or even if you didn't get to actually talk to somebody, just say, "Oh, I picked up flyers at the White and Case table at Texas Talks," or whatever it is. I think that's really helpful. And also, like Lauren mentioned, stay in touch, reach out via email, phone call. If you happen to be, in my case in Houston, on a Wednesday afternoon and want to meet for coffee, I may not always have availability, but if you reach out, you never know. And so I think that could go a long way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And if you're part of the virtual program here, you're already doing the right thing, learning from firms and experts like Doug. So no, thank you so much. And I'll put in a plug because I can't help it. Our virtual programs, are kind of in line with what you were mentioning, actually are a great way for students to do that, as well as all the different types of on-campus programs that firms have. So definitely take advantage of it and make your presence known. So one tricky question that comes up is the timing of firms opening up their portals with when grades are released. So because of the accelerated timeline, what is your advice for a student who's interested in applying to a firm but doesn't have their second semester grades yet, or maybe hasn't even taken finals yet? And then when they do get their second semester grades, I guess a two-part question. How do you recommend that they actually go and update the firms with those grades? So Doug, I'm gonna come back to you for this one to start.
Yeah, so again, it's sort of a tricky kind of thing to navigate because it's a little bit new, right? The timing has sort of necessitated that I think everybody's kind of operating in different ways than they used to historically. To be honest, I think it's the great law school answer that everybody hates, which is it depends, right? I say that sort of recognizing that I think the reality for most people is that it's probably, let me put it this way. I think the advice that I'm hearing from a lot of law firm recruiters is it is absolutely okay for students in most cases to put their hat in the ring a couple of different times, right? That a student might, be really interested in a firm and not quite sure whether the grades that they had first semester make them particularly competitive, or whether their background might be particularly compelling to the firm based on what the firm's looking for, or whatever else it might be. And not knowing, in my mind, not knowing that means that it's in many cases kind of worth taking a shot, right? I mean, it's not as if the firm is not going to see your first semester grades ultimately anyway, right? They're going to get your transcript at the end of the year. They're going to kind of see how you did first semester versus second semester. There's no way to keep that a secret, essentially. But the question of whether you're competitive after only the first semester is really hard determination for a student to make. And so I think, again, unless you've done some research and if the firm that you're applying to says, listen, we only want to see you once, right? And if you're sort of concerned that your first semester grades might not be as strong as you'd hope they'd be, or might not be particularly competitive for what we generally look for, then wait until you've got your second semester grades and apply to us then, and we're happy to consider you at that point in time. But I tend to tell students that, unless that's the case, I generally think it's okay to put your hat in the ring, on the earlier time frame. And the worst case scenario is that you don't kind of get that bite, right? You don't get the response from the firm at that point in time. And then to go to your second question of following up, I think that's just, again, it's going to look different depending on the firm. I've talked to some firm recruiting folks who, for example, are proactively sending out links to all the students who submit direct early applications that say, here's the link for when you get your second semester grades, please upload it here. And they're making it very concise and very simple. I'm encouraging all of them to do that because I think it makes it easier for the students and more productive. I think when that doesn't happen, it's perfectly fine, again, to follow up with Lauren or Ashley or any of the recruiting folks at these law firms and say, I submitted my application a couple of months ago or a month ago or whatever it is. I've now got my second semester grades. Please let me know what format you would prefer. I provide that to you so that you have it going forward. I'm still really interested in the firm, and I'm excited to be considered for any opportunities that are still available. And I would just kind of do it that way, right? If you don't know, then I think you have to ask politely and professionally, and see where it goes. But you can't, you don't want to guess, and you can't be afraid to ask.
Yeah, and I like your point about the link. It's so important to follow the firm's instructions if they do provide them. Lauren, anything to add there from the firm perspective?
Doug, you did a great job of kind of, talking about that follow-up, and yes, my firm as well sends out that link because we do like to see the first semester, but we do want to see the second semester grades. So we do provide that update. But I also think to that point, and I did see this in the chat, if somebody is seeing an improvement in their grades from the first semester to the second semester, that's great. You want to highlight that. You want to talk about that, or if there's some unique circumstances out there, you want to be able to be prepared. You could reach out to someone and talk about that. One thing I do want to also note, because the process is moving a little bit, you also shouldn't hesitate to talk about your own timelines. If you say, I'm really interested in your firm, but I actually am interviewing somewhere, or I have another offer, that's important information for us to know. Secondly, because the process is on a rolling basis, as Ashley had mentioned, if you're not hearing something right away, do not think the worst. Do not think that you interviewed and you're totally not in consideration. Firms have different size programs, and as they work through the process, or as they go through with their multiple offices and they're kind of looking at their programs across the country, they might want to think of numbers a little bit and what that looks like. So reach out, don't hesitate to reach out, but also don't take silence as something that is negative, because oftentimes it is not.
I think it's such a great point, and I'm sure Lauren and Ashley could shed more light on this, but something I've even gotten more appreciation of the last couple of years doing this is firms have such different math. And sometimes firms, based on the size of their summer class, can just make 40 offers in one shot. Some firms don't have the luxury of doing that, and they literally have to make offers one by one. And to Lauren's point, the timing, don't panic if the timing doesn't move as quickly as you expect, because firms are just working on their own particular math of their office or their program. I'm actually going to skip ahead to a question that was related to something you just mentioned, Lauren, because I want to stay on topic. So one of the most important things is communicating with firms effectively and professionally about interview scheduling, offer deadlines, and other topics. And you just touched on this. What are the most important things for you, Lauren? I'm going to stick with you when it comes to that type of communication from students.
So as an applicant, we want to have an understanding as to where they are in the process, if they're, honestly looking in multiple markets, because we have multiple markets as well, and we can kind of guide them from that perspective. But it's helpful for us to know, even if they're asking us, quite honestly, for an extension on an offer if they have with us, and what their timing is. But we can only provide an answer if we have a better sense of what they're really asking us. Secondly, to that question, as an applicant, as a 1L process student, as you're going through this process, because summer programs are going to run concurrent with interviewing, most likely for many of you this summer, I would communicate as much as possible. And one of the things that we do for our 1Ls is, in the beginning of the program, we say to them, we understand that you're going to be interviewing, like, let's make this work for you. Let us know when you need to not be here, how we can support you. Of course, we would like them to be part of our program, but we recognize what's going on. So we want to kind of be upfront about that. But if your firm that you're with for the summer is not asking you, be upfront. Let them know if you're going to miss something, if you need to take space away, if you need to be on a Zoom, or if you're going to be leaving the office, because you want to make sure that they understand where you are and that you're not disengaged in their program. You're just exploring other options, which we understand.
Yeah, Doug or Ashley, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just jump in real quick to I think absolutely, affirm everything Lauren said. I think that's all spot on. I think the other thing is, it is, I tend to use two words when it comes to communication. I think timely and professional are the ones that I just keep saying over and over and over and over again. I think students, historically law students have been, there's been a lot of fear around communication, right? Is it too much? Is it too soon? Is it too aggressive? And I think in the environment we're in, the one nice thing about it is that everybody just kind of expects that over communication is the new norm, right? Because it's the way these sort of processes have been structured is sort of what they're asking for, right? Is, we're going to engage with you a number of times over a long-ish time horizon potentially. And so, as Lauren was saying, we might start emailing with you based on an initial application in May. And then we might email you again about an interview in June. And then we might email you again about a callback. And then we might be sort of talking about an extension if an offer has been made. And this is just going to be kind of an ongoing thing potentially. And so I think students shouldn't be afraid to communicate. I just think you want to be mindful of doing it in a timely manner. We always sort of tell our students that you got to respond somehow within 24 hours of getting a message from a firm, even if it's a message you're a little bit loath to respond to or not sure how to respond to. And the other thing is just making sure that you're really following professional etiquette in all of your communication, right? I know that it's so easy with email and texting these days to just kind of shoot off an email without a salutation or without, sort of addressing the person or without saying thank you at the end or whatever else it might be. And I think this kind of sounds a little bit old school, but I think it's still sort of really important to recognize that even in modern forms of communication, that professionalism shines through for folks. And in addition to shining through, I think it stands out when it's not there, right? I think when somebody gets the all lowercase 3-word response, that says something to them because they're thinking about what that means in terms of how you're going to respond to clients or how you're going to respond to partners or whatever else it might be. So you just need to recognize that every communication has value, but that you shouldn't be afraid to communicate. And the last thing I'll say is, I think it's important for students to recognize oftentimes the benefit in the communication that, it's not just to get questions answered. It's not just, to respond to requests. It's also a way of demonstrating interest, right? I mean, I think if a firm kind of hears from a student, again, in the right way and at the right time, 3 or 4 times kind of saying, here's some new information, or, I wanted to check in on the status of this, or, hey, I just wanted to say how much I really enjoyed the conversation that I had with so-and-so when I had the chance to meet with them recently, right? All these things kind of go into the file, right? All these things kind of contribute to how you're perceived as by the firm. And more than ever, and maybe Lauren and Ashley can correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the sense that firms are really looking for people who can demonstrate that they want to be there, as Lauren mentioned earlier. And emails and communication and those different ways of engagement are a great opportunity to do that.
No, that's great. And one thing that's so important to add there, along the lines of what you just mentioned, Doug, is these are the most important traits as a junior associate. Some of the most important traits is communication, timeliness, professionalism, and a big part of this process, managing competing deadlines, time management, and a big part of this process is a great preparation and showing the firms that you have the skills to jump in as a junior associate. So in the same vein, around communication and managing timelines, because firms are moving at different timelines from each other, what is your advice for a student who's considering an offer or two, but still going through the process? So they might be struggling with the idea of taking an offer and foregoing future opportunities without knowing what's coming next. Ashley, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier when I said, it's to trust your gut. It's important to know and to recognize that you're going to have to make hard decisions, and sometimes in a short time frame. And so you as a candidate you need to take the time to weigh your options and do what feels right to you. And again, echoing what both Doug and Lauren have said already, is that transparency is key. I think students don't realize, while the legal industry is very large, they at the same time don't realize how small it can feel, especially because at least on the recruiter side of things, we all know each other. A lot of us are friends and we communicate. And so we most of the time know what's happening in the market, especially if there's a candidate interviewing at other firms in the same market and stuff like that. So be transparent with your recruiters. Let us know what's going on. Help us help you, kind of thing. Because if we don't know that you have a deadline coming up, or that you want to get experience in a certain practice area that maybe you didn't get at your 1L firm or anything like that, we aren't going to be able to help you figure out if we are then the right place for you.
Yeah, Lauren, I know, I'm curious if you have anything to add there as well.
The one thing that I will add is that, as Ashley had mentioned here, like this is a big decision and you're aiming to make the right decision. But I also do want to say, sometimes some of you might not make the right decision, and that's okay. This is not the end of your legal career in any way. There is always a path to get to where you want to get to. You just have to kind of ask the questions, figure out, kind of re-steer yourself if you're on a different course. So although big decisions that you'll be making for your 1L summer or your 2L summer, it's not defining for your career. And, I can tell you, I've been doing this a long time. I have met people in the lateral market that we interviewed during their summer program, and they went other places, and then they're kind of with us in a different office even. And people find the right place for them. And sometimes they find it on the first try, and sometimes they don't, but you try your best, and you're going to ask all the questions to kind of get there. But the pressure is not to make a decision now for the rest of your life. It is to make the decision based on the information that you have, that you feel good about, that you feel confident in. And if it happens to be wrong, there is a path to get to where you'd like to be. And that's where Doug comes in, or Ashley comes in, or any of us can help get somebody there. So I do want to stress that, because I do think that this process has become so amped up and there's a lot of pressure. But it doesn't mean that it is life defining in a summer over 10 weeks.
That's great perspective. Thanks both Lauren and Ashley. I want to make sure we have a few minutes for questions. I'm going to ask one question here, which is a common one. So, one of the issues of the timeline now is that it occurs while students are working at their 1L jobs, whether that's at a firm, judicial internship, government job, public interest. So for students who are working at their 1L summer jobs while actively interviewing during May and June for their 2L summer, what is your advice to students about managing that process with their current job? Lauren, I'm going to stay with you for this one.
I touched on this a little bit before. I would just be transparent. If you're going to be missing something at your current firm, or if you're having to step away, I would just tell everybody that you need to be away, or tell the relevant people. And I would also be upfront if you're interviewing and you're still interested in the summer opportunity, but you want to keep your options open. Let the recruiting people know so that they kind of understand where your head is at. They also may be able to help you. As Ashley mentioned, we do all know each other, so we can even sometimes connect you or answer questions for you. Our goal is not to have the wrong person working for us either, or somebody that wants a really big program if we have a small program, and vice versa. We want you to have the right fit as well. But I would, kind of repeat the theme that we said, communicate, make sure you're getting your work done. Make sure you're not missing deadlines because you're doing different things. So make sure that you're on top of everything that you're being asked to do. It will be a little bit of a juggle, but don't let a ball drop because you're interviewing at if you're interviewing at another firm, don't let things drop at your current job, because you are trying to make a good impression, and that's where you're at for that particular summer.
Thank you. Doug, Ashley, anything to add there? What's your advice for students on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add two quick things. I mean, one is that I think one of the biggest challenges students face is they don't know what it's going to look like, right? I mean, unlike when this process was just geared towards OCI, and you could tell an employer, I'm going to be interviewing, likely interviewing during these days, and that, I kind of need some time, but I can plan around that. You can't really do that anymore, because the interviews in theory can pop up at lots of different times and a bit unexpectedly. And so I actually think one of the most important things is to set the expectation of not knowing exactly how it's going to go with your 1L employer at the beginning, right? Kind of, saying to them, listen, I'm going to be going through this process. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. I'm always going to strive to give you as much advanced communication as I can. I want you to know that I will, absolutely always do my best to work around these conflicts, right? If it means, working later into the evening, or perhaps having to get something done on a weekend, right? I will make sure that it has no impact on my obligations to you to do the work that's being asked of me. But just kind of preparing them for the fact that things might come up, and that you're going to be doing this, and you're not always sure exactly when and where it's going to happen. I think the one other piece of advice is to not I'm trying to figure out how the best way to put this is to not sort of, especially if you're working at a firm your 1L summer and you're interviewing with other firms for a 2L summer, this sense of sort of feeling like you have to hide the ball, right? That you can't talk to the firm you're at about where else you're interviewing or what your process looks like. I think that probably does more harm than good ultimately, because it's, as you know, everybody's kind of mentioned, everybody knows each other, and it's a business based on relationships and trust. And so I think just, you know, kind of having a comfort level with, you know, a certain amount of transparency is probably going to benefit you if that's the kind of situation you find yourself in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, so I want to make sure we can answer a couple questions that have come in. Yeah, so one question that I think is a good one here. If you've applied for a 1L position at a firm and are planning to apply again for a 2L position, we know there are oftentimes much more 2L opportunities than 1L opportunities. How can a student differentiate or distinguish their application the second time around?
I think if they have an update to their resume, or if they're on a journal that's come in or something like that, and just reinforce that they're interested and they'd like to be considered for the 2L position. But again, if you're kind of applying through a portal, it's a great opportunity to just upload new documents. It's a very easy process to do that. Reach out to a recruiter if you don't know, but I do think you should reiterate your interest and provide any updates if there's anything that happened from your application several months ago until the time that you're applying as a 2L.
Yeah, anything to add there, Ashley or Doug?
Yeah, I would say definitely update it, as Lauren said. I think your cover letter is probably one of the best places to do that. Of course, your resume, but tell us, you know, what you've learned or experienced in, you know, what you've been doing since you applied for a 1L position. Anything to help shine some light on, you know, any new skills that you've learned or anything like that, or any new people that you've met. Definitely tell us that in your cover letter.
Yeah, and I was just going to say the same thing. I think sometimes students think that the only thing that law firms care about that changes between first semester and second semester are grades. And, you know, there's a lot more to it than that, right? I think, you know, a student at the beginning of the summer after they have their second semester grades, you know, might also be able to talk about what their 1L internship is going to be that they didn't know the time they applied, you know, the first time. And it may be something that's a really relevant experience to what the firm does or the type of practice that they're looking to go into. You know, students can talk by the end of their first year, they've signed up for the classes that they're going to take in the fall semester of their second year. And, you know, for example, if you're applying to an office of a firm that does a lot of private equity, right, you might be able to say, you know, this is an area I'm really interested in, and I've even signed up for these 2 or 3 classes that I think show you that this is kind of an area that I'm focused on pursuing. You might have had, Ashley kind of alluded to it, right, some networking conversations with people at the firm between the first time you applied and the second time you applied, and kind of referencing those and maybe talking more specifically about how those conversations enhanced your interest in the firm and really made you excited to, you know, to be reconsidered for a 2L position. Again, I think these are all things that can kind of be part of the process. And it's, you know, helpful for students to kind of be creative and think about more than just the numbers when they're trying to figure out how to make those distinctions.
No, that's great. Yeah, I mean, and just thinking about the timing, as you all alluded to, I mean, the 1L applications oftentimes open in November, December. I mean, that's a lifetime until you get to, you know, April, May, when or June when you're applying to firms the second time around. And like you mentioned, like you all mentioned, you know, not only are there grades, but there's a lot of opportunities to engage during that interim period. So we'll take one more question from the Q&A. This is a good question. If you go to school outside of the market you're aiming for, so maybe you can't attend so many in-person events that the firm is hosting, I guess. How does that impact your candidacy, and what advice do you have for a student who's interested in a firm in that market?
I'm happy to start on this one. It, in my opinion, if you are outside of a market from a firm that you are applying to, let's say, I don't know, you're in Boston, but you're interested in working in Houston. use your cover letter to tell us that. Again, I'm one of those weirdos that loves cover letters. I read all of it, so that is where I get all the juicy details on candidates. But what, like we were talking about earlier, there are so many, especially now, virtual opportunities for you to learn about the firm, engage with people, ask questions. Us, for example, I think in this current semester and last semester alone, I think we've done probably 6, 7, maybe even 8 virtual webinars about different practice groups that we have. And so those are great ways to learn about the firm, get involved, and like I said, put questions in the Q&A, because we take note of that. So I don't think it hurts you necessarily to be in a market outside of where you're applying to, but as long as you are making your presence known any way you can, even if it is virtual, I think that definitely goes a long way. And maybe you have a compelling story for why you want to be in the market that you're applying to. Again, utilize your cover letter to tell us that.
Yeah, that's great advice. Anybody have anything to add there?
I would just second something that Ashley mentioned earlier. When you are in that market, I would reach out, like if you're visiting for spring break or if it's where you're from or whatever, I would reach out and see if someone can speak to you. When you're there, it doesn't have to be when there's an actual event. It can be when it works for you, and they can connect you to somebody, most likely, when you are in that area. But again, we don't expect, we understand that you're in school. We understand that your primary focus is to learn and be in law school. So we don't expect you to be able to attend every event, even virtually, if you're not in person. So I think there's many ways to get around another market for one that you're not in.
And I would just add one thing, which is to where you can, try to use your school's alumni as a resource for that, right? So if you have alumni from your school that are working, in a different geographic location, and you're interested, but you might not have a direct connection, or you might not be present, reaching out to them and sort of trying to build a relationship with them and helping them get to know you and get to know the nature of your interest. Can really, alumni tend to be very sort of loyal people who want to engage with people from their institutions, and they can be great advocates for students internally in firms when students might not be physically present to kind of do that advocacy for themselves in certain circumstances.
I love that advice, because oftentimes alums, especially when it's across different markets, like I went through the same struggle when I was a law student trying to apply to a different market, and might resonate with them. So I think that's great advice. And one thing that we're seeing on our end, if I may add, there are some markets where offices are oftentimes smaller within the firm, and the firm really wants somebody with ties to the area. And even if the ties to the area or the interest in the area is, I really want to work in California because I am so interested in tech and I want to work at these industries. That is a great reason, but having a reason or a tie to the area is super important, as a lot of folks alluded to on that question. Well, this was great. This was super informative, a very, very helpful and timely topic for students. So I just want to thank Lauren, Doug, and Ashley for being a part of this, and a big thank you to Amy Goldstein for approaching us with this, and Legal Mentor Network. As I mentioned before, it's a wonderful organization. If you're a law student and want to get involved, I highly encourage you to do so. It's a great way to meet attorneys in all different areas as mentors, and get a really good view of what the legal market looks like. And thanks again to our wonderful panel. We had a lot of good questions in the Q&A, so I will put in a plug for our recruiting director Q&A hosted by Summer Associate Hub next week. The link is in the chat to RSVP for that, and we'll talk about a lot of the same topics and get some really good insights there. So thank you so much, everybody. Amy, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Albert. This has been a terrific discussion, and besides Albert's upcoming webinar on the topic, also feel free to reach out to people through LinkedIn. Lauren, Ashley, Doug, I hope you don't mind me putting that out there. But there was so much conversation about building relationships and communicating. And so take advantage. And if you do have a specific question, reach out to a recruiter at a firm with the question that wasn't answered. That's the way to start building right now. Lauren, Doug, and Ashley, thank you so much. This was wonderful. Albert, we love partnering with you on this and really appreciate your moderating. We will be posting on the Legal Mentors YouTube channel. Albert, I believe you'll be posting the recording as well.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
And just Thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.